What do Violet Jessop, Martha Paul, and Tsutomu Yamaguchi all have in common? Well, if you said that they beat impossible odds and they cheated to certain death, then you're right. One not only survived the sinking of the Titanic, but she also survived 2 other sinking ships. What are the odds, right? And another one survived not 1, but now, check this out, 2 nuclear explosions. What? It sounds impossible, doesn't it? So what's this all about? What makes some people seem impervious to death while everyone else just kind of waits around for his or her number to be punched? Maybe it starts in childhood. Violet found herself in a hospital bed at the brink of death at a very young age. Lungs ravaged by tuberculosis. Her condition was so severe that the doctors told her parents that it was time to say goodbye because she was not going to make it. Well, not only did she beat those odds, but as soon as she was an adult, at just 21 years old, she chose one of the most dangerous professions that a person could choose in 1908, a stewardess on an ocean liner. At first, the sea seemed to welcome her, and she was thrilled to be out on the water traveling the world. But before long, she would enter a battle with death itself that ultimately she would win, 3-0. In 1910, she took a job with the White Star Line, and she was assigned to the newest and grandest ship that they had ever built, the RMS Olympic, sister ship to the famous Titanic, and the largest civilian cruise liner in the world at the time. Passengers call it a floating palace. Violet, of course, just call it home. But on September 20th, 1911, that palace almost became her tomb.
Welcome to Velarcana. Here, we share mysteries that often defy explanation. I research the cases, and my husband tells the stories.
The RMS Olympic was the largest passenger ship in the world in 1911, and on September 20th, while navigating the narrow Strait of Salent, the Olympic's massive wake pulled the British warship, the HMS Hawke, straight into its side. Well, the Hawke tore 2 gaping holes below the waterline, and for a few short, terrifying moments, the crew absolutely knew that the ship was going down. Well, thankfully, the ship's watertight compartments held, and it limped back to port under its own power. No one died. But for Violet, well, it was an ominous warning of things to come. On April 10, 1912, Violet stepped aboard the Olympic's sister ship, the RMS Titanic, for its maiden voyage. 4 days later, just before midnight, while she was in her bunk reading, she felt this strange shudder, and then the engines fell silent. And I'm sure that you remember the story from there. The great ship, declared unsinkable by just about every expert at the time, had struck an iceberg. All of the stewardess were ordered on deck and to stand calm. Well, Violet stood there in the freezing night air, fighting her own fears as she helped others and watched one lifeboat after the other being lowered into the water. Soon the realization hit her. There weren't enough lifeboats. And just as she was wondering if there was going to be a lifeboat for her, an officer grabbed her arm and ordered her into lifeboat number 16. And then, as the boat was being lowered into this black Atlantic Ocean, another officer ran to the railing above her, holding this crying infant who had been separated from its parents in the panic. "Here," he shouted, "look after this." And then he dropped the baby several feet. Thank goodness Violet was able to catch it. Well, as the lifeboat hit the water and was pulled away, Violet could hear the mechanical groans as the ship was literally being torn in half. But that sound, of course, would pale in comparison to the haunting sound of death itself, because for the next 8 freezing hours, as she kept the child under her heavy coat, she had to listen to the cries of more than 1,500 people while they gradually froze to death in the icy water. Cries that faded slowly into a terrible permanent silence as each person died one at a time. That would have haunted me for the rest of my life. Well, at dawn, the rescue ship Carpathia appeared, and as Violet climbed aboard, still holding the baby, the frantic mother rushed forward, snatched her child, and then without a word she vanished back into the crowd. Neither the baby's nor the mother's name was ever discovered. At just 25 years old, Violet had already survived 2 maritime disasters, and one of them was the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster in modern history. But death wasn't done trying to claim her just yet. No, because her most terrifying survival was yet to come. During World War I, the ever-so-brave Violet volunteered as a nurse aboard the HMHS Britannic, now painted white with a giant red cross and serving as a floating hospital. Well, on the morning of November 21st, 1916, as she was having breakfast in the Aegean Sea, a powerful explosion ripped through the bow. The ship had hit a mine, which tore this gigantic hole in the side of the ship, and the Britannic began sinking with lightning speed. Now, this should show you just how much death really wanted this girl. See, the captain, well, he kept the engines going full speed, desperately trying to get the ship to the shore before it sank. And that decision created an absolute nightmare. Lifeboats were being lowered into the water while the ship was still moving. The problem, of course, was that the massive propellers were churning like meat grinders, and these poor lifeboats were being dropped into the water and barely missing those propellers. Well, Violet got into one, and as it was being lowered into the water, she watched as the lifeboat just ahead of hers was sucked straight into those blades and shredded into 1,000 tiny pieces. People in wood were grinded up instantly. Well, a second later, Violet's lifeboat hit the water, and it headed straight toward those same propellers. Once again, it should have been curtains for Violet, but something inside of her said no, not yet. Now, check this out. Having no other options, Violet jumped out of the lifeboat and into the violent ocean. The suction instantly pulled her below the surface. And tumbling through the darkness, her head slammed hard against the bottom of the ship. The impact fractured her skull, and for just a moment she almost lost consciousness. But her determination was strong, and she fought upward, kicking as hard as she could, until a hand reached down and yanked her to the surface. Bleeding and coughing up seawater, she watched as the Britannic reared up and then plunged beneath the waves, taking 30 lives with it. Violet Jessop had survived 3 of the most famous maritime disasters in all of history. She recovered from her fractured skull, and then she did the one thing that almost no one else would have done. And I bet you can guess what that was, can't you? If you said that she went back to sea, well, you're right. And she continued working at sea for the next 34 years, traveling the globe, serving passengers, and refusing to let death claim her. Well, she finally retired in 1950 to a quiet cottage in Suffolk, England. Well, Violet's story is amazing, and it completely defies the odds. But she was just one person. What do we make of an event where 15 people all survive a horrible disaster simply because they were late? For 30 straight years, the Westside Baptist Church in Beatrice, Nebraska, had run on one unbreakable rule. The choir director, Martha Paul, ruled the roost every Wednesday night, and if you wanted to sing in her choir, well, you had to be there on time, no later than 7:25. No other options, no way out, no excuses. So most members arrived by 7:15. Marilyn Paul, Martha's own daughter and the church pianist, could not remember a single time that anyone had ever been late. Not once in 3 decades. Well, February 22nd, 1950 had been their last ordinary practice in that building. And no one knew it then, but 1 week later, everything would change. On March 1st, 1950, dawn broke bitterly cold, and Reverend Walter Klemple, he stopped by the church at 4:30 in the afternoon and lit the furnace so that the sanctuary would be warm for practice. He and his wife Eunice always brought their daughter, Marilyn Ruth, with them. They usually arrived around 7:10. But that night, the baby stained her dress. Eunice had to iron another one. Their clock had been set back 5 minutes, so Eunice thought that they still had time, but they didn't. At that very same moment, a few blocks away, Marilyn Paul herself was sound asleep on the couch. She had planned to arrive 30 minutes early, but for some reason, she had been completely exhausted after dinner, so she told herself that a quick 15-minute nap wouldn't hurt anyone. Well, her dreams were just too good, I guess, because time got away from her, and that 15-minute nap turned into a half an hour, and she didn't wake up until 7:15. How could a few more minutes possibly matter? Well, that question would haunt the entire town for decades to come. A few blocks further on, bass singer Herbert Kipp sat at his kitchen table writing an important letter to their denominational headquarters. He felt that it was imperative that it go out that evening. Interestingly, his mother kept hounding him to leave for practice, but he refused to stop writing until the letter was finished and ready to be dropped into the mailbox on his way out. He knew he was already late, and he knew the rule. Well, 18-year-old Alto Lucille Jones turned on the radio at 7 o'clock to catch This Is Your Life. She told herself that she would leave before it ended, and she would still be able to make practice on time. But then the announcer revealed that tonight's episode was about Edgar Bergen. Lucille decided that she simply had to hear the whole story. She was supposed to pick up her neighbor Dorothy Wood on the way, but this episode was just too important. Edgar Bergen was worth the trouble that she would get into for being late. 15-year-old soprano LaDonna Vandergriff was bent over her geometry homework at 7:23. She knew practice started promptly. She also knew the rule about being late, and she had always arrived early. But that night, she refused to leave until she solved this stubborn math problem. 2 miles away, Royana Estes sat behind the wheel of a car that simply would not start, and she was supposed to pick up her sister, Sadie. Both women were now going to be late, so they phoned LaDonna for a ride, but LaDonna was still wrestling with that geometry problem, so the sisters had no other choice but to wait. Ruth Schuster normally arrived at 7:20 with her younger daughter Susan, but that evening she had to help her mother prepare for a missionary meeting. Her brother, Harvey Al, another choir member, was taking care of his 2 younger sons while his wife was away. He planned to bring his boys to practice, but he got caught up talking and he lost all track of time. When he finally glanced at his watch, he realized that he was going to be late. And then there was the church stenographer, Joyce Black. She lived directly across the street from the church. She was dressed and ready to go, but it was cold outside, and she just couldn't seem to get herself to leave the warm house. Later, she called it just plain laziness. She kept putting it off until she simply couldn't wait any longer. And at exactly 7:27 p.m., Joyce Black opened up her front door and stepped outside. What happened next shook the entire town. The church exploded. Walls blew outward as if being punched by some giant fist. The heavy wooden roof crashed straight down, and the steeple was hurled into a nearby street. Lights went off all across Beatrice, and the blast was so powerful that windows shattered in houses across the road. The town's radio station was knocked off of the air. When firefighters raced to the scene, choir members began arriving one at a time, each one expecting to find all of the others dead in the rubble. While they searched frantically through the debris, songbooks and sheet music fluttered through the air like startled birds. One of them landed beside Joyce Black. She picked it up and kept it.
When I opened up the door and stepped out, our church just disintegrated. What really impressed me was our sheet music and our songbooks. They were flying through the air. We had a lot of those things. It was really something to see.
Within a half an hour, all 15 members had staggered in, each one late for his or her own tiny ordinary reason. Not one had been inside when the explosion took place. They stood together in the freezing night air, holding each other's hands. Then someone said quietly, "Let's all give thanks to God." And then they offered a prayer of thanksgiving that they had all been spared. Later, investigators discovered that a natural gas leak from an underground pipeline had somehow found the fire in the furnace directly beneath the choir loft. Mathematicians would calculate the odds of the entire choir being late on that one single night at more than 1 in a million. 15 ordinary people scattered across an entire town, each one stopped by something different and trivial, on the one single night that the church exploded at the exact second that they all should have been inside. But even that 1 in a million chain of delays would pale next to the story of a man who walked away from not 1, but 2 atomic blasts. His name was Tsutomu Yamaguchi, and in the summer of 1945, he was a 29-year-old draftsman for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries designing oil tankers. And for the last 3 months, he had been on a business trip in Hiroshima. August 6th was supposed to be his last day. Well, he was walking the shipyard when he heard the sound of a single aircraft overhead. He looked up and he saw the American B-29 Enola Gay release a small object dangling beneath parachutes. Suddenly, the sky was lit with a blaze that he later described as the lightning of a huge magnesium flare. While drawing on his Navy air raid training, Yamaguchi dove for the nearest irrigation ditch. He rolled in, flung his hands over his head, locked his fingers across his eyes, and jammed his thumbs into his ears. The ground roared and an ear-shattering noise ripped through the air as a fireball exploded overhead. The shock wave tossed him into the air like a rag doll and slammed him face down into a muddy trench. A woman who had been walking beside him only moments earlier simply vanished as if she had been disintegrated. At first, when he opened his eyes, everything was dark and he couldn't see anything at all. His face and his forearms were in extreme pain. Later, he found out that they had been severely burned. Both of his eardrums had been ruptured. Well, as his eyes slowly adjusted, he discovered that he was standing in a sea of fire and death while ash fell like snow all around him. Yamaguchi staggered through a nightmare landscape that looked more like someplace in hell than any place on Earth. Fires were everywhere, and there wasn't a single building standing. Well, the first point of business, of course, was for him to get out of that area and find help. But getting his bearings was nearly impossible, as nothing looked familiar. In any case, he picked a direction and began walking, zigzagging every few steps so that his feet didn't land on any of the 1,000 body parts all around him. Many bridges were just twisted metal and fragmented concrete. At one river crossing, he was forced to swim through a dozen or so bodies as they floated in the water. Well, he finally made it out of the wreckage area, spent the night at a bomb shelter, and then made it to an operating train station and endured an overnight journey back to his hometown in Nagasaki. He arrived early on the morning of August 8th and limped straight into the hospital. The doctor who treated him was actually a former schoolmate, but the burns on Yamaguchi's face were so severe that he didn't recognize him at first. Later, when he returned home, now feverish and swaddled in bandages, his mother first thought for sure that she was seeing a ghost. Well, despite being on the verge of collapse, he somehow found the strength to drag himself out of bed and to work the next morning. And I thought I was a hard worker. Well, at work, around 11 o'clock, while standing in a meeting with his supervisor describing the nightmare that he had just went through the day before in Hiroshima, now this is crazy, a powerful roar blasted through the building and Yamaguchi instinctively immediately dropped to the floor just as the windows imploded. He later said that the experience was so surreal that he thought that the mushroom cloud had somehow followed him from Hiroshima. Broken glass and debris flew through the room. Thankfully, the city's hilly terrain and the reinforced stairwell in this building had dampened part of that blast. Yamaguchi emerged alive, surviving 2 atomic blasts in 3 days. Interestingly, his wife and his infant son also survived, but only because she had gone out looking for medication for her husband and she was in this tunnel when the second bomb detonated. Had Yamaguchi not been hurt in Hiroshima, his family would have been home when the second bomb exploded, and they would not have survived. In the weeks that followed, radiation took its toll. Yamaguchi's hair fell out, and he suffered high fevers and uncontrollable vomiting and open wounds that turned gangrenous. Yet somehow he slowly recovered and he lived another 65 years. He worked as a translator for Allied forces, taught school, resumed his engineering career, and raised 3 children. In his later years, he became a powerful voice against nuclear weapons, writing poetry and a memoir and even speaking at the United Nations, declaring that it was his destiny to tell the world what he had experienced. The Japanese government officially recognized him as the only Niyu Hibakusha, that's twice-bomb person, in history. He died on January 4th, 2010, at the ripe old age of 93. A few months before he died, he looked back on his life and he said that every second that he had been given after those 2 bombs was a bonus. 3 impossible survival stories that sound more like legends or exaggerations than actual true events. Right? So what are we to make of all of this? Well, stick around because I share my thoughts next. Violet Jessop, the entire church choir, and Tsutomu Yamaguchi were all survivors of seemingly impossible odds. But believe it or not, these are just a few. There are literally thousands, maybe tens of thousands of other stories just like them. Take Yamaguchi, for example. He was the only person that the Japanese government officially recognized as surviving both nuclear blasts, but solid evidence exists that show that there were at least 165 others who also survived both of those blasts. Some people say that survival stories like these are nothing more than just random chance stretched to the breaking point. A baby's dress gets stained, or a geometry problem refuses to be solved, or a man dives into the exact right ditch at the exact right moment to survive a nuclear bomb. But many people believe that there are just moments in reality that refuse to stay inside of society's box. When Amy brought these 3 stories to me, they blew my mind. I mean, just take the church choir for a moment, right? 30 unbroken years of ironclad punctuality shattered on the one and only night that it mattered. Violet's story, a woman whose refusal to let death win carried her through a life-threatening childhood illness and 3 maritime catastrophes. And Yamaguchi, a man who survived Hiroshima, made it home to Nagasaki and still had the strength to stand at a meeting describing the first blast when the second one hit. What if, in some way, our deepest thoughts and beliefs affect our reality? What if, as so many great minds have stated all throughout history, everything is connected to everything else? And that when a person's inner beliefs, or frequency, I guess, is simply out of alignment with something like death, well, then in that moment, even death can't lock on to that person. What if the universe, or fate, or some greater intelligence out there somehow quietly rearranges the small things in our lives, all just to keep certain souls here just a little while longer because their stories aren't quite finished? Much of the world says that events like these are just blind luck, but a few people say that there's no such thing as luck, that we're actually all inventing our reality second by second as we move along. Maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. Perhaps fate does in some way set the stage, but then our free will decides how we're going to walk across that stage. Maybe stories like these are not the exception to the rule, but rather quiet proof that the line between life and death is far thinner and far more mysterious than any of us would like to admit. That our smallest choices, our ordinary delays, our stubborn refusals to give up, are actually what ripple outward in the ways that we can't yet fully see. And sometimes, when you think that the universe is just quietly whispering your name, well, it's actually moving mountains, stopping clocks, and rearranging the stars themselves in order to keep your life going just a little while longer. So maybe the next time that life hands you an ordinary moment, a nap that runs too long, a letter that you just feel compelled to finish, or even a traffic jam that you just absolutely despise, you should pause. Because perhaps, in that very instance, you're not simply moving through your day. No, you're actually cheating death itself, and you don't even know it.
Cases like these, where the odds seem impossible, leave us often searching for a why. We look for patterns in the chaos. But in my opinion, each one of these cases falls completely outside the realm of human understanding. There was truly something amazing, something different going on in each case. And when we look at the church choir, I truly believe we aren't just looking at this series of random lucky breaks. We're looking at something spectacular, a moment where the impossible became reality for 15 different people at the exact same time. I researched each person in the choir, looking for patterns, trying to find out if any of them went on to do something incredible later in life, something that would have made a difference in the future. And I came across something that really resonated with me. Now, you guys know I'm a bit of a math nerd. I spent many years educating teachers on how to make math accessible for elementary students. And I found that LaDonna actually became something of a legend in math education. Her delay, just a teenager stuck on homework, became a real-world example used to teach probability. But what makes this situation so profound is that she not only had to be delayed, stuck on that math problem, but also all 15 choir members had to be delayed as well. Her case would not have been elevated to the level it was if she were the only person to survive. She was doing a math problem that created a math example because the odds were, so incredibly tiny. A single moment that somehow stretched far beyond that night in Beatrice, into classrooms, textbooks, into the minds of countless students trying to understand probability worldwide. I love the irony. LaDonna was late because she couldn't solve a math problem, but by being late, she gave the world its best example of a math problem. So maybe the next time you're staring at a boring piece of homework or frustrated by a trivial delay, just remember LaDonna. Sometimes the problems that we can't solve are the very things that keep us exactly where we're supposed to be. If you like these types of stories created and shared by humans and a dog, not AI, would you please consider supporting our work by becoming a member at Buy Me a Coffee? Membership at one of the levels gets you a mug or a t-shirt signed by our newest researcher and mascot, Arcana. Thank you guys so much for watching.